I was standing in the parking lot of Houston Methodist Hospital at 11:30 on a Wednesday night, trying to remember where I'd parked my car, when my son's wife walked up behind me and put her hand on my shoulder. "Dad, you should go home and rest," she said. "I'll stay with him tonight." I turned around and looked at her. She had red eyes from crying. Her mascara had run down both cheeks. She was holding a paper cup of coffee from the vending machine inside, and she looked, by every measure a person could apply, like a devoted daughter-in-law keeping vigil over her sick father-in-law. I told her I was fine. I told her I just needed some air. I told her I'd be back upstairs in 10 minutes. What I did not tell her was that 20 minutes earlier, the attending physician had pulled me into a small consultation room off the cardiac wing and shown me something on his tablet that made me grip the edge of the table to keep myself upright. My brother's blood work had come back. The numbers didn't match any of the diagnoses they'd been chasing for 7 months. And the doctor, a quiet man named Dr. Okafor, who chose his words the way a surgeon chooses a scalpel, said to me, "Mr. Bridges, I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer me carefully. Who prepares your brother's meals at home?" My name is Leonard, and I'm 64 years old. I spent 31 years working as a civil engineer for Harris County, helped design drainage systems that most people never think about until it rains and their street doesn't flood. I retired 3 years ago. My wife Agnes passed 8 years back from ovarian cancer, and since then it's been just me in the house we raised our kids in, and my brother Clifton, who lives 20 minutes away in Pearland. Clifton is 61. He was a high school football coach for 25 years, then moved into school administration. He's the kind of man who remembers everyone's birthday, fixes his neighbor's fences without being asked, and still makes his late wife's sweet potato pie recipe every Thanksgiving, even though she's been gone for 11 years. He is, without any exaggeration, the best person I know. His son, my nephew Jerome, is 37. Jerome married a woman named Adrian 4 years ago. She came from Mobile, Alabama, had a degree in accounting, worked in financial planning for one of those wealth management firms downtown. She was sharp, well-dressed, always said the right thing at the right moment, the kind of woman who made a strong first impression on everyone she met. Clifton liked her well enough at first. Jerome was happy, and that was enough for Clifton. But about a year into the marriage, things started to shift in ways none of us could name clearly. Clifton started having stomach problems, fatigue that his doctor attributed to age. Then the tremors in his left hand, mild at first, then more pronounced. His hair started thinning. He'd been a man who walked 4 miles every morning since he turned 50. That stopped. He told me in the fall that some mornings he woke up and couldn't figure out if he was dizzy or just tired, and he wasn't sure anymore which one was worse. His doctor ran panels. Nothing conclusive. Possible early neurological involvement. Possible autoimmune. They tried one medication, then another. Clifton kept getting worse. Jerome and Adrian had moved into Clifton's house 14 months earlier, shortly after Jerome's construction business ran into serious cash flow problems. Jerome told his father it was temporary, 3 or 4 months at most while they stabilized. Clifton said yes immediately. That's who Clifton is. You don't ask him twice. Adrian took over the cooking about 2 months after they moved in. She told Jerome that Clifton needed to rest more, that managing the kitchen was tiring him out. She started preparing all 3 meals. She made his morning tea from scratch. Loose leaf, steeped exactly 5 minutes, a little honey, the way she said she'd learned from her grandmother back in Mobile. She managed his vitamins and supplements, organizing them into one of those weekly pill organizers and setting it on the kitchen counter every Sunday night. She drove him to his doctor's appointments. She sat in the waiting room with a book, always available, always present, to anyone looking from the outside. She was a model daughter-in-law. My sister-in-law had been gone long enough that I think some part of Clifton was grateful to have a woman taking care of the house again. He didn't question it. Jerome didn't question it. I didn't question it. But Clifton had told me something in September, about 5 months before that night in the hospital parking lot, and I had brushed it off in the way that I am not proud of. We were sitting on his back porch after a Sunday barbecue. Jerome and Adrian had gone inside. Clifton was quiet for a while, which was unusual for him. Then he said, "Leonard, that woman keeps track of money the way a hawk tracks a field mouse." I asked him what he meant. "Last week she asked me who my accountant is. Week before that she asked if I had a will, said Jerome mentioned I hadn't updated it since Sandra passed." He paused. "I haven't updated it. That's true. But the asking bothers me. The way she asked, like she already knew the answer and was testing me. I told him he was probably reading too much into it. I told him grief changes how we hear things sometimes, makes us suspicious of kindness. Adrian had uprooted her life to help take care of him, I said. That was worth something." Clifton nodded slowly and didn't push it. "You're probably right," he said. I should have listened to him instead. Clifton collapsed in his living room on a Thursday evening in January. Jerome called me from the ambulance. By the time I got to Houston Methodist, they'd already moved him out of the ER and into a monitored room. He was conscious but weak, his skin an ashy gray that made him look 10 years older than he was. Jerome was beside the bed. Adrian was in the hallway, on the phone with what she said was Clifton's insurance company, making sure everything was properly filed. Over the next 2 days, the hospital ran every test they could justify. On the third day, Dr. Okafor asked to speak with me privately. He'd been Clifton's attending since admission, and I'd noticed him reviewing Clifton's chart with a particular kind of focus. The focus of someone who sees something that doesn't fit and keeps returning to it. He closed the door to the consultation room. He set his tablet on the table between us. "Mr. Bridges, your brother's blood work shows elevated levels of arsenic." I heard the word. I didn't process it. "Not environmental exposure levels," he continued. "Not trace amounts from diet or water. We're talking about repeated ingestion over a sustained period. The concentration and the pattern of accumulation in his system are consistent with what's sometimes called chronic low-dose poisoning. His symptoms, the neuropathy, the GI issues, the fatigue, the hair loss, they're textbook." "How long?" I asked. My voice didn't sound like my voice. "Based on what we're seeing, at least 6 months, possibly longer. And you're saying someone, I'm not saying anything yet except what the labs say, but I've already contacted hospital security, and there's a detective from HPD on his way. They handle cases like this." He looked at me steadily. "I asked you who prepares his meals because in cases of domestic arsenic exposure, the source is almost always someone with consistent access to the victim's food and drink." I sat in that room for what felt like an hour. It was probably 4 minutes. Then I stood up, thanked him, and walked out to the parking lot because I needed to breathe air that wasn't inside that building. And that's when Adrian appeared behind me with her paper cup of coffee and her running mascara and her hand on my shoulder, asking if I needed anything. I told her I was fine. I had never been less fine in my life. Detective Renwick was a lean black man in his late 40s with a kind of face that gave nothing away. He met me in the hospital's security office 45 minutes later. He had a yellow legal pad, a pen he kept clicking, and a patience that was either natural or very well practiced. He told me what they suspected. He told me that arsenic, specifically arsenic trioxide, is odorless and tasteless and dissolves in liquid. He told me that in small repeated doses it causes exactly what Clifton had been experiencing. Symptoms that shift and overlap and mimic so many other conditions that most doctors spend months chasing the wrong diagnosis. He told me that people who do this are generally not impulsive. They're deliberate. They understand what they're doing. Then he asked me to think about Clifton's financial situation. I told him about the house. Clifton owned it outright, paid it off in 2009. It was worth around $490,000 in the current market. He had a pension from the school district, a retirement account, a life insurance policy of $350,000 that still listed Sandra as the primary beneficiary, and an estate that, if he died without an updated will, would pass by Texas intestacy law primarily to Jerome as his only surviving child. Renwick rode for a while without looking up. Then he said, "And if Jerome were to divorce after inheriting, Texas is a community property state. Anything acquired during the marriage would be split, I said. Depending on how the assets were held and the timing, yes. I thought about Adrian asking about Clifton's accountant. I thought about her asking about the will. She works in financial planning, I said. I know, Renwick said. I pulled her employer information while we were waiting. She'd know exactly how estates work. She'd know the law. She'd know the timelines. What do we do? He put the pen down. We do this carefully. I want to install monitoring in your brother's home. We test the food containers, the supplements, his tea. We document everything before we move. If we go in now without sufficient evidence, a defense attorney argues contamination, argues coincidence, argues the hospital made an error. We need to be airtight. And in the meantime, my brother is in that hospital room with her, walking in and out every morning with flowers and that tea she makes him. Your brother drinks nothing that comes from outside this hospital while he's here. That part is controlled. What we need is to document what's been happening at home. He looked at me. And I need you to go back up to that room and act like you don't know anything. That was the moment I understood what the next few weeks were going to cost me. I called my daughter, Patrice, that night from my car. She's 38, lives in Dallas, works in HR management. She's the calmest person in our family and the one I call when I don't know how to carry something alone. I told her everything. She was quiet for a long time on the other end. Then she said, Daddy, does Jerome know? That's what I don't know. And I can't find out yet. What do you need me to do? Come to Houston, I said. I need someone else in that room who knows, because right now I'm watching that woman bring my brother orange juice every morning, and I cannot keep my face neutral by myself. Patrice drove down the next day. She was better at it than I was. She has her mother's ability to keep warmth in her eyes when her mind is somewhere else entirely. She chatted with Adrian about Houston restaurants, about Jerome's business, about nothing. She smiled. I watched her do it and felt both grateful and hollowed out. On the fourth day in the hospital, when Jerome stepped out to take a call and Adrian went to the cafeteria, I sat beside Clifton's bed and told him. I'd been dreading it, but he looked at me when I walked in alone. Looked at me the way brothers look at each other when they already know there's news they're not going to like, and he said, Tell me what the doctor really found. So I told him, all of it. He stared at the ceiling for a long time. His jaw worked. I watched him absorb it. The shock, then the slow, terrible rearranging of everything he thought he knew. She brought me tea this morning, he said finally. I know. Jerome cried last night, right there in that chair. Told me he couldn't lose me too. His voice broke on the last word. Does my son know? We don't know yet. Renwick is watching his communications. There's no evidence he's involved. He's not involved. Clifton said it flat and certain. I know my son. Whatever she is, he doesn't know. He closed his eyes. When he opened them again, there was something in his face I recognized from when we were boys. The look he got when he'd already made his decision and was just waiting for the right moment to act on it. What do I need to do? He asked. Get better, I said, and let us handle the rest. Clifton was discharged after 6 days. The doctors told Jerome and Adrian that he was responding well to treatment for a complex autoimmune condition and would need rest and careful diet management. They said nothing about arsenic. Renwick had arranged it. The first morning Clifton was home. Adrian made his tea. The kitchen had 4 pinhole cameras by then. 2 installed by an HPD tech who'd come in while Adrian was at the pharmacy with Jerome, dressed as an HVAC contractor checking the ductwork. The cameras covered the counter, the stove, the cabinet where the tea supplies were kept, and the kitchen table. They also had a warrant for her phone's purchase history, going back 14 months. For the first 3 days, nothing on the cameras. Adrian cooked normally. She was attentive. She asked Clifton twice a day how he was feeling. She refilled his water glass before he asked. I started wondering again. I started thinking about what it would mean if we were wrong, if the arsenic had come from somewhere else, if there was an explanation none of us had considered. On the morning of day 4, Renwick called me at 7:15. "We have her," he said. The camera at the tea station had recorded Adrian at 5:52 in the morning, before anyone else was awake. She'd opened the cabinet, reached behind the box of regular tea, and retrieved a small glass jar with a metal lid. She'd measured a precise amount of white powder into a cloth tea strainer. She'd placed it in the teapot with a loose leaf and then returned the jar to its position behind the box and closed the cabinet. She'd done it without hesitating, without looking around, without a moment's uncertainty. It was the movement of someone who had done this dozens of times. "There's more," Renwick said. He told me that the purchase records pulled from her Amazon account, the one registered to a name that wasn't hers, shipping to a mail forwarding address in Stafford, showed 14 months of orders for arsenic trioxide powder, sourced through a specialty chemical supplier that sells to hobbyist metal workers. The orders matched the timeline of Clifton's illness exactly. The first order had been placed 2 weeks after she and Jerome moved into the house. Then Renwick played me an audio clip. It was from a call Adrian had made 4 days earlier to her cousin in Mobile. The call had been picked up through a warrant on her phone records. The cousin asked how things were going. Adrian said, "Slower than I planned, but the doctors still don't know what it is, which means nothing points anywhere. Once he goes, Jerome is the only heir. The house alone is worth close to $500,000. With the pension and the life insurance, we're looking at over $1 million total. Texas community property. When I'm done being the grieving daughter-in-law, I'll give it 8 months, file irreconcilable differences, and walk." "What about Jerome?" There was a pause. "Jerome is sweet. He really is. But Jerome was a means to an end, and the end is almost here. I didn't move from Mobile to Houston to be a middle-class wife in Pearland forever. I had to set my phone on the kitchen counter and stand there with my hands flat on the tile for a full minute." Adrian had looked at my brother, a man who opened his home to her without hesitation, who called her sweetheart, who bragged to his friends at church about what a wonderful woman his son had married. And she had seen a transaction, a timeline, a balance sheet. I called Renwick back. I told him I didn't want to wait. He told me he understood. He told me he needed 48 more hours to compile the full evidence package. He told me that every additional documented poisoning event strengthened the prosecution's case and narrowed the space for a defense attorney to maneuver. 2 days, I said. 2 days, he confirmed. And your uncle drinks nothing she prepares. Officer Davis will be at your brother's house each morning by 5:30 to intercept and replace anything she puts in that kitchen before he wakes up. Those were the longest 2 days of my life. I sat at Sunday dinner with Adrian passing the rolls and asking Jerome if he wanted more iced tea. And I ate my food and I said thank you, and I watched my brother sitting at the head of his own table, looking a little better each day because the poison had stopped reaching him. And I thought about patience as an act of love. We did it on a Tuesday evening. Clifton had suggested we all have dinner together. He'd made a point of telling Adrian it would mean a lot to him, that he was feeling stronger and wanted a real family meal. She'd seemed touched. She'd offered to cook. Clifton said he'd handle the cooking this time. She'd done enough. She smiled and said, "Of course." I watched that smile from across the room and understood that some people perform kindness the way an actor hits a mark. They know exactly where to stand. They know exactly what the audience needs to see. And they feel nothing about the distance between the performance and what's real. Jerome grilled the chicken. Clifton made his cornbread from scratch. Patrice drove down from Dallas again and brought sweet tea and a pecan pie from a bakery in the Galleria area. We set the table the way Clifton's wife used to set it. The good plates, the cloth napkins, the low centerpiece of yellow flowers that she'd always kept on that table. We sat down to eat. Halfway through the meal, I heard a car door close outside. I stood up. I need to grab something from my truck. I opened the front door. Renwick was on the porch with 2 officers from HPD. He was wearing a tie, which I hadn't seen before. He looked at me and gave a small nod. "Is everyone home?" "Come in," I said. Adrian saw the officers before Jerome did. I watched her face, and what I saw confirmed everything. It wasn't surprise. It was the microsecond recalibration of someone who has been planning for contingencies. A quick look toward the back door, a look at Jerome, the briefest assessment of options. Then she put on the confused face. "What is this? What's happening?" Jerome stood up. "Dad, what's going on?" Clifton stayed seated. He folded his hands on the table the way he used to do at school board meetings when someone was trying his patience. Renwick stepped forward. "Adrian Louise Chambers Coleman, you're under arrest for the attempted murder of Clifton Bridges by means of arsenic poisoning. You have the right to remain silent." Jerome's chair scraped back hard against the floor. He said something I couldn't fully hear. Adrian started talking loudly, saying this was impossible, saying she loved this family. Turning to Jerome with her eyes full and saying, "Baby, please, you know me, you know I would never." Jerome looked at her. Then he looked at his father. Clifton met his son's eyes and nodded, slowly, once. That was all Jerome needed. He sat back down. He put both hands flat on the table. He did not look at Adrian again while the officers let her out. The front door closed. The house was quiet in the particular way it gets after something permanent has happened inside it. Not peaceful quiet, just absence. Like air filling a space that was just emptied. Patrice reached across the table and covered Clifton's hand with hers. Jerome sat very still. He had the expression of a man who was taking damage in real time and has decided to absorb it without falling over. I recognized it because I'd seen it on Clifton's face when Sandra died. It's the look of someone choosing to stay upright even though nothing in the world is requiring them to. "Dad," Jerome said finally. His voice was steady but thin. "How long did you know?" "I found out in the hospital," Clifton said. "Your uncle found out the same night." Jerome turned to me. "I wanted to tell you," I said. "The detective needed us not to. Not because we doubted you. Because if she knew we knew, everything would disappear and she'd walk." Jerome nodded. Kept nodding for a few seconds longer than necessary, the way people do when they're using the motion to buy time before they speak again. "She cooked for you every day," he said to Clifton. "She sat with you in the hospital. She—" He stopped, started again. "I thought she loved this family." "She loved what this family had," Clifton said quietly. "That's a different thing. And it is not your fault that you couldn't tell them apart. She was very careful to make sure you couldn't." Jerome put his face in his hands. Clifton got up from his chair, moving slowly, still not fully himself, and walked to the other side of the table and put his hand on the back of his son's neck, the way fathers do when words aren't the right tool. "You didn't do this," Clifton said. "She did. And the fact that she fooled you doesn't make you guilty of anything except loving someone who didn't deserve it. I've done the same thing in my life. So is your uncle. So is everyone sitting at this table." Jerome cried. He tried not to, then stopped trying not to. And Clifton stood beside him with his hand on his boy's shoulder, a man who had survived 9 months of being slowly killed and was still standing, still present, still the person his son needed him to be. I looked at my brother in that moment and thought about the word grace. Not the religious version, though Clifton would include that. The human version. The choice to extend yourself toward someone else when you have every reason to pull back. The choice to be the steady thing when everything is shaking. The trial took 7 months. Adrian's attorney argued that the arsenic in Clifton's system had come from contaminated well water at a property Clifton had visited in East Texas, and that the purchases under the assumed name were for a legitimate metalworking side business. Adrian had been quietly developing. The attorney was expensive and good and presented the alternative theory with real conviction. The jury took 11 hours. They convicted on attempted murder, felony assault causing serious bodily injury, and poisoning with intent. The judge, who had apparently read the full case file carefully before sentencing, gave her 30 years. She would not be eligible for parole for 20. Jerome filed for divorce the week after the conviction. He did not contest anything. He did not want anything that had been part of her life in that house. He moved into an apartment in Midtown Houston. Took a job managing construction projects for a nonprofit that builds affordable senior housing across Harris County. He told me he needed the work to mean something for a while. Clifton's recovery took almost a year. Arsenic doesn't leave the body the way other things do. He went through chelation therapy, then months of rebuilding. His strength, his nerve function, his appetite, his ability to walk his neighborhood again without stopping to rest on someone's retaining wall. He was stubborn about it in a way that his doctor found challenging and I found deeply familiar. By fall, he was back to walking 2 miles in the morning. By the following spring, he'd added the 3rd mile back. One evening in late October, I came over and found him in the backyard with his hands in the garden bed along the fence, which Sandra had originally planted and which he'd maintained for 11 years without ever calling it his garden, only ever calling it his garden, only ever calling it hers. He was putting in new bulbs. He didn't look up when I came through the gate. She'd want something blooming by March, he said. She would, I agreed. I sat on the porch steps and watched him work. After a while, he sat back on his heels and looked at the sky, which was doing something complicated with the last of the evening light the way Houston skies sometimes do in the fall. Renata asked me if I wanted to read Adrian's letter, he said. Renata was the victim's advocate assigned to our family by the DA's office. She'd been a steady presence through the trial. What letter? Adrian wrote to the court as part of some restorative process the prison offers. She says she understands the gravity of what she did. She says she wants Jerome to know she never stopped caring about him as a person. He paused. She doesn't mention me directly. I think that detail is intentional. What are you going to do? Clifton picked up another bulb and turned it in his hand. I'm going to plant these. I'm going to make chili on Sunday. I'm going to call Jerome and make sure he eats something that isn't from a vending machine. He set the bulb in the ground. I'm not going to read the letter. Not because I can't, but because I know what's in it, and what's in it isn't for me. It's for the judge, who might one day hear a parole request. He looked up at me then. I forgave her already, he said. Not for her sake. For mine. I'm not carrying that woman around inside me for 30 years. She already took 9 months of my life. That's enough. Last month, on Clifton's 62nd birthday, we had a family dinner at his house. Jerome drove over from Midtown. Patrice came down from Dallas with her husband and their little girl, who is 4 and has decided that Uncle Clifton is the best person at any table she's ever sat at, an assessment I consider completely accurate. Clifton made brisket, low and slow since the night before, the way our father used to, filling the whole house with that smell that takes you somewhere immediately. He made potato salad and green beans from the garden. Jerome brought a chocolate cake from a bakery in the 3rd Ward that Clifton had mentioned once, weeks earlier, and Jerome had remembered. After dinner, the 4-year-old fell asleep on the couch. The adults sat on the back porch with iced tea and the last of the day's warmth. Jerome and Patrice were talking about something that made them laugh, a real laugh, the kind that doesn't need any effort. I looked at Clifton. He was watching his son laugh, with the same expression he'd had watching Jerome play in a championship game 25 years ago, all pride and a little bit of wonder that someone this good came from him. You okay? I asked. Better than okay, he said. He meant it. Later, when Jerome and I were loading things into his car, he stopped with a stack of containers in his hands and looked at me over the roof of the car. Uncle Leonard, he said, I keep trying to figure out what I was supposed to learn from all of this. About people. About trust, and I keep coming up empty. I thought about it for a moment. I'm not sure the lesson is about trust, I said. I think the lesson is about paying attention. Not suspicion. Attention. There's a difference. Suspicion looks for what's wrong. Attention sees what's real. I leaned against the car. Your grandmother used to say you can learn more about a person from what they do when nobody's looking than from everything they say when someone is. Jerome was quiet. Then he said, Adrian was doing something when she thought nobody was looking. She was, I said, and somebody was looking. He nodded. Loaded the containers in the back. Closed the hatch. Thank you, he said, for not giving up when it would have been easier to. I drove home on the emptier roads, windows down. The Houston air doing that thing it does in early fall where it almost feels like something you could forgive it for all summer. I thought about Clifton in his backyard planting Sandra's bulbs. I thought about Jerome laughing on that porch. I thought about a man named Dr. Okafor, who asked the right question at the right time and changed everything by doing so. I'd been a quiet man most of my life. I solve problems that exist underground, that most people never see, that only matter when they fail. I'm not someone who usually has much to say out loud, but I'll say this. If someone who loves you, really loves you, the way a person loves you when they've got nothing to gain from it, tells you something feels wrong, stop. Don't explain it away. Don't tell them they're reading too much into it. The people who love you without an agenda are the most reliable instruments you'll ever have access to. Clifton told me something felt off about Adrian 8 months before she almost killed him. I told him he was probably seeing things that weren't there. I was wrong, and the cost of that mistake was 9 months of my brother's life, his health, his sense of safety in his own home. He's still here. He's planting bulbs and making brisket and watching his grandniece run through his backyard, and I am grateful for that every single day in a way I don't have words proportionate to. But I want you to hear me when I say this. If the person next to you seems like a different person when they think no one is watching, believe what you see. Not what you hope, not what they tell you, what you see. Stay safe. Take care of the people who actually take care of you. And if you've ever had that feeling that something wasn't right with someone everyone else trusted, tell me about it in the comments. Because every story shared is a warning someone else might need to hear. I'm Leonard Bridges. This is Voices of Uncle Marvin. And I'll see you next time. I've had a long time to sit with what happened to my brother. And the thing that stays with me isn't the arrest, isn't the trial, isn't even the moment I heard Adrian's voice on that phone recording talking about Clifton like he was a line item on a spreadsheet. What stays with me is a Sunday afternoon on Clifton's back porch, 8 months before any of it came to light, when my brother told me something felt wrong, and I told him he was probably imagining it. That is the part I have to live with, and I've thought about it enough now to understand something that I don't think gets said clearly enough. The choices we make when we dismiss what we know to be true don't just affect us. They travel. They land on the people we love. My choice to explain away Clifton's instincts didn't protect anyone from discomfort. It just extended the window in which someone could keep hurting him. That's how cause and effect actually works. Not in dramatic, obvious ways. In quiet, accumulated ones. Adrian didn't poison Clifton in one dramatic moment. She did it in tiny, patient increments, every morning at the kitchen counter before anyone was awake. And I failed to protect him in the same way. Not in one big failure, but in a dozen small choices to prioritize comfort over clarity. What I learned from Clifton himself, though, is something different. Because Clifton did not come out of this bitter. He came out of it clearer. He forgave Adrian not because she deserved it, but because carrying that weight would have meant she'd taken something from him that the arsenic never managed to. That's not weakness. That's the hardest kind of strength there is. The kind that costs you something to hold on to. Jerome showed a different kind of strength. He had every reason to collapse inward after what happened. He'd shared a bed with someone who saw his father as an obstacle to clear. He could have let that define his understanding of people, could have let it close him off. Instead, he went and found work that meant something to him, built something useful with his hands and his mind, and kept showing up to his father's dinner table. That's what I mean when I say I believe in the 3 things a person has to keep building their whole life: how they treat people, how clearly they're willing to see, and how they behave when it costs them something to do the right thing. Adrian had intelligence. She understood finance and chemistry and human psychology well enough to almost get away with murder. But intelligence without integrity is just a more sophisticated way to cause damage. Clifton had less formal education than she did, and understood more about what it means to be a human being than she ever will. That's not an accident. That's a life's worth of choices compounding. My brother is in his garden right now, probably, planting something that'll bloom in spring. He's alive, and that still hits me some mornings like a wave I wasn't ready for. If Dr. Okafor had asked a different question, or asked it a day later, we might be telling a different story. Pay attention to the people who love you without an agenda. They're the most reliable thing you have.